This is Conversations at the Well, a monthly podcast that invites you to listen to ideas and stories that will refresh and challenge. It doesn't matter what state you are in, when you come to the well, you will always leave inspired and renewed. Let's listen to today's conversation, hosted by Bishop Roy.
Good day, everyone. It's always a delight to have you joining us on Conversations at the Well. In fact, it's the first one for 2022. And I'm so blessed this year to have as my first guest a nation builder, a wonderful Christian woman who continues to make her mark in Jamaica and elsewhere. Welcome to you, Dr. Christine Hendricks. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, Dr. Roy Notice. My
It is my
bishop.
well, thank you, and it is my pleasure to have you on. You know, I could have no better guest to start this year than to have you, and I appreciate you consenting to be on. No, Christine, it is said that the strength of a nation and the health of a nation, if you want to judge it, you look at how we treat our elderly and our disabled citizens. You are well positioned to tell us whether or not this nation is healthy because you presently serve as the executive director for the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Okay, wonderful. So tell us how did you get there? What journey have you taken to reach this place, this high position of service in the nation?
Ah, Reverend Bishop. This journey has been a long one that I didn't understand at first, and one that I tell people nobody could tell me that I would be serving in the capacity that I'm serving, and doing all the things that God has helped me to be doing so far. I Let me take you way back into my childhood.
Sure.
I was born in Portland,
Hmm.
and at the age of 2, when my grandmother died, my grand aunt came and asked my mother for me so that she could grow me for her. So she took me back to Manchester with her, and I grew up in Manchester. I recall my childhood days, um, recognizing that I was a little different from others. I was born with some of my fingers missing, and I other things too. But I often wondered, why I was born the way I was born. However, my grand aunt, she never allowed what I now know as my disability to be a hindrance to me learning anything. So she taught me to do everything, and she would boast about me. She would take me everywhere. She would boast about me to say, "You see her fingers? She write good, you see? And she
Ah,
bright, you see." She would tell everybody.
yes.
And I didn't understand it then because, as a child, 2, 3, 4, 5 growing up, you just go along with the tide.
Hmm. Hmm.
um as I got older, coming into say age 10, I began to wonder about my own identity. My mother used to visit from Kingston, and I used to wonder about my father, and who he was, what he looked like, and all of those things. And I still wondered about my fingers and whether or not, um as I grew older into teenage years now, if I would ever get married, if anybody would love me, and all of those things, crossed my mind. Anyway, God always has bigger and better plans. I got saved at the age of 16 in the New Testament church in Malgully. God bless Reverend Walters and Sister Walters. They
Yes,
were the
BB
ones.
Walters. Yes.
Yes, BB Walters. They mentored me in my early years. I recognized as I was growing up, though, that although persons would tease me about my fingers and how I looked, because of how my grandaunt grew me, I just used to dance and sing along with them, and it never bothered me in that way. And so they never teased me for very long. But I know that persons would stare, and um, as I grew older and got a little braver, I would say, "You can ask me." I was born with my fingers like this. And after a while, they asked, "How you write, how you this, how you that." I still didn't understand how all of that would wrap into my purpose. Went through to high school, and I before I started high school, I left my grand aunt, and she now handed me over to my mother, or gave me back to my mother, and I grew up with began growing up with her at age 12, 13 thereabouts. And going there, I felt a little out because I didn't grow up with her, although she would visit all the time when I was younger. Um, I felt out of place. I felt that, my brother and my sister that she had at the time were more loved and wanted than I was. Not that she made me feel that way, but I felt that way. And I began to, continue to question, my fingers, and why was I born this way? Um, anyway, she did love on me, but as I said, I guess maybe when you grow up without your parents, and then you come into having, to live with them, there is always that question in your mind as to why did she give me away? And, that feeling of not being loved or not being wanted, whether or not she displayed that, and she didn't, I must be honest. Went through high school, and I recognized that that wasn't, my fingers were not a problem. I had friends. I did well in high school until I got to fifth form, and somehow the rebellious years kicked in. And I, in those rebellious years, my mother and we couldn't get along for whatever reason. I look back now and I can't figure out why. And I just decided that I wouldn't study for my CXCs, and I was going to do that because I was going to spite my mother. That is how I would get back at her for all the trauma that I felt I was going through. Um, and oh, before that, I remember, and I'm not saying this now to cast any doubt on Anglican Church. I was an Anglican. I grew up as an Anglican. I was confirmed at the age of 12 and all of that. But then when I became 16, and some evangelists came to the house that, where I lived, and they were staying over with Sister Swayze at the time. She has passed now. And at my 16th birthday, 16th birthday,
Sweet
you live
16.
it up. It's a big
Yes.
party.
Yes.
My mother threw a big party for me, and my neighbor, we lived in the same house, so a large house. And so we lived on one side and she lived on one, and the evangelists were there, and they kept inviting me to the crusade, and I told them no, I had to study, or I had homework to do. I always found the excuse. um anyway, when my birthday came around, she said, well, at least ask them to pray. And in my mind, I'm saying, pray at a birthday party? I've never heard of that before. Anyway, I consented because, I said, all right, it would look too bad to say no. So I consented for the evangelist to pray, and he was there, and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed. And I opened my eyes and I was like, this a man thinks a church in there or something in my praise so loud. Anyway, I was just dying for him to finish, and for him to go his way. Anyway, he persisted after the birthday party to invite me to the crusade, and I found every excuse. The crusade went from 2 weeks into 3 weeks, and eventually I gave in because I couldn't find any more
Yes.
excuse. So I went on a Friday night when, there would be school on the Saturday. And when I went that Friday, I was like, wow, it was the first I was experiencing worship like this. It was the first I was hearing preaching like this. And I was fascinated. And I started going to every night. It didn't matter
Wow.
anymore.
Yes.
Eventually I got saved the following Thursday night. That was April, after my birthday, April 16.
Wow.
I just, they were singing. I don't remember the preaching. I remember the song, I Surrender All. And I tell you, Bishop, I sang that song like I've never heard it before. And I just surrendered my life to the Lord there and then.
Well,
It was.
this is a good point, maybe to take a praise break, as we as we listen to your story. You know, talking with
Oh,
Dr. Christine Hendricks, and she's just walking us through her many different life experiences to help us to understand the journey that she's been on, and how come she's where she's at. And you know, Christine, I couldn't help but hear so many things jumping out of your story, and the things that I believe can be very helpful to those who are struggling with different areas of their lives, especially with disabilities. I mean, you talk about the kind of bravery, the kind of words that your was it your grand aunt or
grand aunt.
your grand aunt you fed into your system that helped to build up your ego. So you were quite a confident young lady as you went through high school, but then you also took us on a journey where you took the path of rebellion. But thank God for Jesus that
Amen, amen, amen.
you became a Christian. Tell us, at what point did you go off to like college and that tertiary aspect of your journey?
Yes. So after high school, I didn't know where I was going. I wanted to tell you though that that journey of getting saved was not smooth at all. It wasn't all smooth because moving from an Anglican church into the New Testament church, I was told I would never amount to anything. Nobody would ever recognize me or anything that I did, because I was going to this clapham church that was not recognized, and I was leaving the established church, and I was torn. I was so torn. I used to bawl every day, but thank God the evangelists, they were there as excellent supports. They didn't move out of the community immediately. They worked with us as young converts,
Yes.
and they helped us, but it didn't all go well. I couldn't handle the pressure, the pressure coming from others saying all sorts of things, and I didn't know how to handle this decision that I had now made, because it was so new and everything was so different. My heart wanted to go to the New Testament church, but I was told that it's not recognized, I wouldn't amount to anything. So what do I do? And so I was told too that if I started going to the New Testament church, I would have to leave the house. I would have to leave home. My darling mother, whom I love dearly. I think maybe the pressure had gotten to her too. And I didn't know what to do. So I just had to go back to going back to the Anglican church. And in my heart and in my walk, I walked away from the Lord. And I think I became the worst for it. I did some things that I don't even know where they came from. And I was the worst. That was when the rebellion kicked in. And I was in my, final years in high school. And so in that moment, I decided, or in those moments, I decided I wouldn't study, and I didn't. So when I did my exams, I failed
Oh,
every single one of them except English language and English literature. I failed. But I didn't care because I thought I had gotten my revenge. Um, However, I learned later after I graduated that I wasn't spiting anybody but myself.
a big lesson, eh?
A huge lesson.
Yes.
And so when high school ended, so I walked away from the Lord, and that was for an entire year. God in his mercies sent back the evangelist a year, exactly a year after, because it seemed that around that time, April into May, there would be crusades. And they sent them back. And of course, because I was so hardened, I told them, no, I'm done with church. I'm done with everything to do with God. And I was just done. Anyway, they persisted, and I, eventually went back to the crusade one of the nights. And while I was there, and a lady was preaching. Of course, I don't even remember what she was saying, but um, I recognized towards the end of her preaching, before she made the altar call, I began musing on what she was saying and looking into my life and looking to the past year. And I decided that life that I have been living was not for me. And I began walking up to the altar. And while I was heading to the altar, she started making the altar call. And I stood at the altar, and it was not as dramatic as it was before. I just said, Lord, without feeling anything. So the first time it was all emotional, bawling and, feeling all clean and good and nice. But this time I just stood at the altar and I said, Lord, I'm coming back to you. I know I don't deserve to come. I know I have messed up. And even if you don't want me, I'm going to force up myself on you until you accept me. I didn't understand salvation, fully. So I thought I had to force up myself on God for him to accept me back. And I walked away that night knowing in my heart and in my mind that this was it. Come hell or high water. I did face the same challenges, but this time my mind was made up totally. And I followed the Lord in water baptism in May. And it was difficult. It was difficult because going to church now, I had to make sure that I prepared the family meal before I left. So I woke up early because I was now convinced and convicted. Nothing could hinder me. So I did everything that I had to do, and I went to church. And church used to keep until 2, 3 o'clock. So when I came home, that was fine because dinner was ready. And so I I was out of high school now, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was going, where I was heading. And I just began going to church, going to Bible studies, just trusting the Lord, reading my Bible, wanting more, desiring more of him. And around May too, they had tarrying service and all of that. And I got to not only desire the infilling of the Holy Spirit, but desiring to know this God for myself.
Of
Because I
course.
recognized very early that going to church and being in the space is not all that it takes. It took also developing my own relationship with the Lord. And so I used to spend times, just locked away by myself, fasting by myself, reading the word by myself. Those days, the King James Version was it. And at 17, I didn't understand a lot, but I asked the Holy Spirit to open my eyes, and I started reading Philippians and Ephesians, and the books just came alive, like God was just talking with me. And I developed that relationship where I could hear God speaking literally in my heart and in my mind. And I recall um my cousin came from Kingston. He owned an insurance company, and he just came from Kingston. I don't remember him ever coming before, but he came. My mother, let me go back. My mother owned a business, a restaurant and bar. and a grocery shop like, and I decided I didn't want to go in business, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. Anyway, he came and he said to me, he asked me, "What are you doing with your life? You need to go back to school." And I said, "Well, my mother said she sent me to high school for 5 years and I wasted it. So I don't have the requisite subjects. I only have two. And so I really don't know what I want to do." And he said, "All right, I am going back to Kingston, but I'm telling you this. You need to find a school. You need to find some subjects that you need to do. I will pay for them. I will take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. You just need to find the school and tell me the subjects that you're going to do."
What an offer.
Ah, divine intervention, can I tell you? And I found Knox Community College, and I selected, three other subjects. I did history, I did sociology, and I think it must have been economics and biology. I think I did four,
Right.
human and social biology. And I went and ended the year and did well in the subjects. And so I now had 5 or 6 subjects. And just as the year was ending, now I used to participate in youth club in my community, the police youth club in Mile Gully. I was the vice president and then the president. And I recall at that time they had a program called the Canada World Youth Program. And I remember um, the invitation came for persons, we were young, to apply, to go to Canada to be exposed and all of that. And I introduced the program to the entire youth club and to everybody else, but not to myself. And I recall the day for my last class at Knox. I left home early and I didn't know why. Anyway, I went to Mandeville, and it was not until I got to Mandeville that I recognized that my class was not at 11, but at 2. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, why am I going so early? Why am I here? And I decided, okay, I'm going to go over by the Social Development Commission and just hang out a little bit, say hi to my friends, and then, because as part of the youth club, the Social Development Commission was very integral to that. And having gone there, I saw a whole lot of young people, and I was like, what's so many young people doing over here? And I stopped and asked a few. Some were there to do police tests and soldier tests and all sorts of things. And then I saw some of my own young people, and they said, "You don't remember that today is the interview for the Canada World Youth Program?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. All the best, do well," and so on and so forth. And I, encouraged them, and I went inside and said hi to the president of the Mandeville Police Youth Club and, some Social Development Commission people. And I was about leaving, about 11:30 or so. I was about leaving, because the journey to Knox would take a while, and that hill to climb. Um, and when I was heading through the door, the president ran and he grabbed me and he said, "Aren't you doing the interview for the Canada World Youth Program?" And I said, "No, I'm not interested." He said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "I am not interested. I'm going to class. It starts at 2 and I'm late." And I was pulling away and he held on to me and he said, "Well, you and I are going to have it out today because you're going to do that interview." And I fought and I struggled and he held me and he dragged me literally into the room and plopped me down on the chair and put the paper in front, because there were two aspects to the interview: a written aspect
Right.
and a verbal, face-to-face
Mhm.
interview. And he stood over me and decided I had to do it. I gave up because I didn't have a choice. He was stronger than I was. And I did the test and I finished before everyone. And I was like, did I do the right thing? I looked over my paper and I looked over and I looked over and I said, I don't care. I don't want to go anyway. So if I fail, big deal. Handed in my paper and he said, oh, you're not finished. You are going to do the face to face now. I was like, what is wrong with this man? Anyway, I went in and remember, I didn't prepare for this thing.
Right, right.
And so I went in and had a nice chat with the persons there from the SDC, from Kingston and all over the places. And I then left. And he said, okay, now you have done what you need to do. I went and that was it. I forgot all about it. A couple months later, I got, in those days, you get letters, right? So I got a letter.
Snail mail.
I got a letter through the mail, post office. Congratulations, you have been selected to represent um, your youth club and your parish to go to the national interview. And I'm like, what are you talking about to go on this Canada World Youth Program? And I'm like, what? I don't want to go. And the SDC lady, we had that lived with me where I was because we had moved and lived at another place, similar arrangement with the SDC lady and my mom and us. And she was excited because she came with the news also.
Right.
And I said to her, I don't have a passport, so I can't go. She said, don't worry about that. Here's a passport form. Fill it out.
She was ready for you.
I said, well, I don't have any pictures. She said, don't worry about it. You can go take two passport size pictures. I'll take in everything for you and all of that. And I was like, I don't want to go. What is wrong with these people? Rev, I didn't know it was the Lord setting me up properly. And the real underlying reason I didn't want to leave was because back then you learn that if you leave your church, if you leave your community, you're going to backslide. And I had seen that as a reality in a number of young people who had left and gone to town and then they came back and they no longer came to church. And I did not want that to be my story. And so I guess the Lord, not I guess, the Lord saw my heart. But he saw the bigger picture. And I fought against this with everything in me. Anyway, the long and short of the story, I went to the interview in Kingston and I aced it and was now on the national ambassador ship to be going to Canada.
How long did you
Um,
spend in Canada?
we went 1988. We spent 3.5 months, and
Wow.
that was during Gilbert. I know my time is going, don't it? That we don't have the interview
No, no, press along. We'll adjust.
yet. And the long and short of the story, I went to Canada with 21 other Jamaicans. I remember the minister of youth at the time, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett. He gave us the talk, imploring us that we were going to be ambassadors for Jamaica and, how we were to be on our best behavior and all of that. When we went to Canada, my counterpart and I, we worked at this hospital. And looking back now, or looking back, in recent times, I recognize that the first two people I got to work with were two young men who had disabilities. I didn't know it then. One was 19. He had met in an accident and he had become fully paralyzed from his neck down. So he had now had quadriplegia. And it was such a joy, to see him in the mornings. He could just move his hand and he could smile and he would greet me every morning I went in. And it was just such a joy to help the nurses to take care of him. And then there was another young man who I don't recall the name of his disability, but he remained a baby, although he was very old, but all his features were that of a baby. Um, and he couldn't respond as the other one could, but he was just such a joy, to take care of them both. And
You
I
know,
thought
I'm,
to
I'm gonna
myself,
I'm gonna interrupt you a bit because as I listen to your story, I find it not only very riveting, but also very fascinating. And a scripture has come into my mind that the steps of the righteous are ordered by the Lord, indeed, and God does not make mistakes. You know, just that encounter with those two persons, people at the hospital, and to see where you are now, it's amazing. What did that tell you at that point? Maybe it's upon reflection about God and about God's work in your life.
at that time, it told me nothing.
Right.
But upon reflection, looking back at my life, I saw where God had always been weaving into my life, um, the destiny he had for me and the purpose he had for my life. I totally never understood it. But so many things happened. Because after I left Canada, because I said to myself, if I was going to stay in Canada, I would be a nurse because I like the environment and so on. But then I said, back in Jamaica, I'm not sure I could manage the rough hospital, the difference and everything else there. And so when we came to Jamaica, because we all came back, so we met up with 21 Canadians and we got introduced to the culture and so many things. It opened my eyes and I knew God in a different way then because I recognized that God could keep me in Canada. Because when I was there, I recall just standing up in this open field and I felt so alone and lost. And I looked up in the sky and I said, God, I am here. You have to be here with me. And in the cold air, because it was way up in Nova Scotia, I felt this warmth just engulf me. And I said, yes, God, you are here. And throughout my 3.5 months being there, I knew his presence was there. So, he was able to help me to maintain my Christian walk as a young person. And so when we came to Jamaica, we all came back, 42 of us, Canadians and Jamaicans. We came to live in, my group came to live in Clarendon. We stayed with families, similar to what we did in Canada. Then we became part of the family, learning the culture of the community and doing some work in the community. To this day, I pass a bus stop in Tollgate and know that I had a hand in building that bus stop because we did that as part of our project. And
Some
when we were in Jamaica, my counterpart and I worked at this school, Osborne Store All Age School. And that was when I knew I wanted to be a teacher. And so I left the program for college. I decided that I wanted to go to college, teachers college. Some another friend of my family helped me get into college, and of course I had persons who told me that being a teacher not going to help you. You're not going to earn any money, you're going to be poor all the days of your life, and that is not what you're going not what you should be doing. You should be going into business. And by now I had, you know I was 18, 19. I had come into my own. Whatever you say didn't matter to me. I know what I wanted. And so I headed for college. $2,000 was the fee at the time, and I had to take a student's loan.
for those $2,000 days to come back now.
I tell you,
Which teachers college was this?
Church Teachers
you,
College.
you went to church. So I'm gonna pause you there, and it's fascinating, Dr. Hendricks. Sometimes people see where you are now, but they would never imagine where you have been. and the journey that you have taken. You know, you have talked with us about your conversion, about your journey of discipleship, you know, including things like water baptism and the engagement in Christian service, your journey abroad, and now we are at college. I'm going to lift you over an aspect of your story. I know it's very difficult to do, you know, because we don't want any gaps in the story. But after you have after finishing college, you taught. Where did you go into teaching? Where did you teach?
Yes, I went into teaching at the Mile Gully Secondary School. It was at the time.
Right, right. And how long was
I
that?
taught grades 10 and 11, but I can't leave college because you know why? That's where I met my husband.
You know, I'm going to invite you back so we can talk about you and and Ethan. We're not, cause that's a story. That's a whole story by by itself. I know, I'm not going to go to the Ethan story, but just to say that I know you have a very strong marriage, and both of you are two wonderfully loving Christians. And I will leave it right there, Christine. Let me ask you though, in terms of, you know, giving yourself fully to serving in helping those with disabilities. When did that actually start?
So after I did about 6 years at Mile Gully um secondary school as a teacher, I felt the tug that it was now time to study something else.
Okay.
I went to the New Testament summer camp 1 year, and Reverend Vernon introduced me to the Jamaica Theological Seminary, where I could do counseling because I wanted to do counseling psychology.
Right.
And they didn't have counseling psychology. So he told me that I could do guidance and counseling. And then I could go on to do my master's in counseling psychology if I wanted to at a later time. And so it was that at that youth camp, I'll never forget that youth camp. As a matter of fact, I was at this session and somebody, a young lady, they were dividing persons into teams. You wanted to go into the different groups. And this young lady, I never met her before. She just said to me, they said, persons who are interested in counseling should come, to this group, and persons interested in music go to another group. And she nudged me and she said, "You look like a counselor." And I looked at her and I was like, "Oh, you know that I'm interested in counseling." I said that in my mind. So I went into the group with Reverend Vernon, and that's where he introduced me to the theological seminary. So I went there, and it was my last day at the seminary doing my last course in group counseling. And the facilitator of group counseling asked us that day, "What's your greatest fear?" And in the group, I shared that at the time, my greatest fear was the fact that my husband and I had decided to leave Manchester. Well, he was going to go to UA for his final 2 years, because he had done the years before in the evening, working and studying, and he was now coming in to do full time. And so we decided to leave Manchester, coming into Kingston. And when we came, I, I had resigned my job as a teacher.
Okay.
And coming into Kingston now, my greatest fear was the fact that we had moved, and I had no idea where I was going to get a job. I did not have a clue. Anyway, we got a break after I shared that, and other people shared their fears, and I stood up outside having my fruit at the break, and a gentleman walked up to me, and he introduced himself as the executive director of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. I'd never heard of that place before. And he said to me, "I was listening to you inside, and I have been noticing you over our time in class. I didn't even know I had classes with him. He said, I know that you're a bright young lady and you have a great future ahead of you. Um, I noticed that you said, I heard you say your greatest fear not having a job. Um, I'd like to introduce you to the council and ask you if you know, first of all, that you have a disability. And I looked at him and I said, I have a what? You said you have a disability. And I said, what is that? He said, your fingers. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. That's what it's called. I didn't know the word before, to be honest. Um, and he said to me, did you know that if you are um, registered with the Council for Persons with Disabilities, you are employed, you can apply for income tax exemption? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. He said, yes. And he asked me if I was interested. And I said, okay, fine, great. And then he said, I have a job to offer you. He at the time, the principal rehabilitation officer was going on leave because she had become ill. She was going to be going on early retirement, and so they needed a replacement. And he said he was inviting me to apply. I was like, God, this is you, really? Oh my goodness. Anyway, it didn't happen for a year. But during the year, can I tell you, that's another miracle by itself. The Monday before school was supposed to open, the Sunday, sorry, and was the Monday school was going to open in September. I went to church the morning and a gentleman was invited to preach. That I started going to the Portmore New Testament Church of God. Reverend W.A., Bishop W.A. Was the pastor of the church, and he had invited a guest preacher. And the gentleman preached the story about Job. And as the man preached, it sounded so much like my story because we had come into Portmore, left Manchester, we were paying like $3,000 for rent, and coming to Portmore where we were now paying $15,000. And I know I wasn't working, and my salary, I this was my last salary, and things were hard, things were tough, things were difficult. At one point we didn't even have a fridge. Oh my goodness, I need to tell you that story. Oh my God, when we use God money and buy one motor for one fridge, and the fridge popped down anyway. To this day, we didn't get the use of that fridge. And I learned, don't touch God tithes and offering. It's not going to work out for you. So that's another story by itself. But anyway,
That's interesting, right? So did you eventually get, how did you eventually, after that invitation by the president, you eventually got in?
yeah, so a year after, I went to teach at Dunrobin High School for that year in between, miraculously. And then I went to apply to do the interview for the job of principal rehabilitation officer. And I started working at the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities in August 3, 1999.
Wow.
I started working there as the supervisor for all the social workers, and some workshops that they had, and a girls' hostel that they had in Kingston at the time.
Well, let's use that then to segue into just talking about the association itself, or the council, because
Yes.
I cannot help but say that God, in his divine providence, opened the door for you, and you stepped right in, and he opened it, you just said, at the right time. Now it is said that in Jamaica, a lot of people don't really understand this whole disability. In fact, you said, interesting, you said that you yourself, you were unfamiliar with the word disability. So let's begin there. How would you define a disability?
So the Disabilities Act defines a disability as an individual who has a long-term impairment, and
Mm,
that long-term impairment can be physical, intellectual, mental, or sensory, and the sensory has to do with deafness or blindness. So any one of those, whether you've lost any of your limbs have been impacted, that's physical, including cerebral palsy. Although cerebral palsy, as the name says, it's something that's happening in the brain. It
right.
impacts persons physically. So cerebral palsy is not a brain, is not a disability of the brain or the intellect. It's a physical disability, although it impacts the brain. And so the other disabilities are related to the limbs in terms of the physical. In terms of intellectual, it has to do with one's IQ being 50% or less than the average individual. And so persons with intellectual disabilities never usually get beyond a grade 6 in terms of their intellect and their learning, but they're very streetwise, some of them. And we have quite a number of persons with intellectual disabilities on the mild spectrum that they don't even acknowledge or recognize that they have an intellectual disability.
When we talk with sorry, Dr. Hendricks, it is said that sometimes in Jamaica we don't know what kind of a language to use when you're trying to name or describe a person with disability. So it says a person who is deaf. Do we say to the person, we know you're deaf, or do we say you have a hearing impairment? Or how would you guide us?
They're deaf. So they're either deaf or hard of hearing.
Okay,
Right. So they don't have a problem with being called deaf, because deafness is not only the fact that they don't hear, they have a whole culture and a whole history and a whole um sense of pride. Some persons, those who are learned, because they go to they get into being um uh part of tertiary level education. Some of them, they have studied abroad. And so for those who have reached a certain level, they have a pride about deafness, that if you tell them that they need hearing aid, they'll tell you, but I don't have a disability. They'll tell you that too, you know and so deafness is not just not hearing, as I said, but it is a culture that they have come to accept. They have a whole language around it, the Jamaican Sign Language, and they have their whole lives wrapped around that culture that allows them to um, operate in society. And that's the reason they advocate so strongly for Jamaican Sign Language to be part of the culture of Jamaica, because they are a people who are part of the society. And so they need to be recognized as full citizens, and we need to speak their language so that they too can understand what's happening around them. And
interesting.
so,
And as you talk, Dr. Hendricks, about deafness, there's and about advocacy. One of the big advocacy move that in my preparation for the conversation with you was that the Disabilities Act was passed, and it was passed in 2014. That seems like a long time ago, almost a decade.
yes,
It is said that the act won't come into effect until next year, February.
yes.
Yeah, that's a big gap. What happened?
So many things have happened. So, although the Disabilities Act was passed in the Parliament in 2014,
Right.
there were a number of things that must be in place for it to be effective. Of course, there are the regulations, the establishment of a body corporate called the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. So, although there is an entity now called the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, it's an entity that is within the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So, it doesn't stand on its own, neither does it have the capacity, the human resources, the financial resources, nor any of those resources, nor the power or the authority to do any of the things that the act mandates. So that body has to be established. The Disabilities Rights Tribunal had to be established, and there had to be codes of practice developed so that the society is guided as how to avoid discrimination, because the Disabilities Act is actually a legislation that is promoting non-discrimination against persons with disabilities. So it is one of those legislation that is driving social behavior change. And so it is something that has to be carefully planned. And having not or never done this before, there have been varying trajectories that we have taken since 2013, actually, seeking to bring the act into effect. So the council started with determining, well, having island-wide consultations to look at some of the things that needed to be in these codes that are to be drafted, are developed, looking at what the regulations should look like. And so that took some time. When that was happening, governments changed. And so the board that was overseeing the work of the council, they had to go, and a new board had to come in, and
Well,
a
well,
lot
maybe
of changes
maybe we
took
can
place.
say welcome to Jamaica. Um, but would you say now that the fact that we're heading into 2022, would you confidently say that everything is in place and we are now
Most
ready?
things are in
Most things.
place.
Okay,
So the
fine.
regulations were approved in the parliament in October
Right.
of 2021. And so the regulations gives now the power and the authority for the establishment of the body corporate. It gives the body corporate the power and the mandate that it now needs to effect the provisions of the act.
What
And
are some
so
of the
that
big visions? Something that you say, boy, you every day you think when you think about this being in the act and a part of the provisions, you give God thanks. What would you say are two, three of those provisions?
the fact that, one, the council will be a body corporate.
Okay.
And a body corporate, meaning that it will be an independent body. It will no longer be in the what should I say, under or in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. It will have its own finances. It will hire its own human resources. It will be governed by a board of management who will report to the minister. It will be a larger entity with so many more human resources. It will have a complaints mechanism that will come. Persons who feel discriminated against can come to the council to complain. There will be an investigation, and then it can be taken to the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, which is another established body that will adjudicate or hear the matters of discrimination and determine and settle the matter. That has never happened before
Wow.
in Jamaica nor in the Caribbean. So we are out front there, and the Caribbean is watching to see how we're implementing and bringing this act into effect. And so um, that the body corporate, so as a body corporate, it can sue and be sued. And the crown, I always say to my colleagues, the act binds the crown. And that means government will not get away either if it discriminates against persons with disabilities. The Council for Persons with Disabilities can take the government to the tribunal if it discriminates against persons with disabilities. So that's a big takeaway.
That's big, and so I think we're all looking forward to this act being enforced and the provisions of it, so that the quality of life for those who have disabilities will certainly improve. Christine, how can the church help in terms of serving those with disabilities in a more effective and humane way?
And I am so happy when I got the call for this interview. I have been thinking, although I'm on vacation, my thoughts still flow in terms of work. And I have been thinking And I'm saying, how can I get my church, which is the New Testament church that you head, to be in line to ensure that it doesn't discriminate against persons with disabilities and we facilitate the growth and development of persons with disabilities. And so this is such an opportune
Praise God.
time and and
Yes.
and 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 part of the destiny and purpose. And I'm happy I'm talking with you,
Thank you.
Bishop Notice, because you are at the place where decisions can be made and things can happen. And so let me say that persons with disabilities should not be seen as only charity cases. We have long moved past where persons with disabilities are just quote unquote taken care of. And I will jump back to my childhood just for a moment to say, if I had grown up with my mother, she would have taken care of me. And that would have handicapped me. That's not a word we call people, but it would have allowed me never to learn to become who I am today. So I needed to go live with my grand aunt because she is the person that instilled such a confidence in me that you can and you will, that I believed so much that I today can confidently talk to other parents and say, what you say to your child is critical to where they go, what they do, who they become. Many parents take their children with disabilities and shelter them to the point that they learn not to do things for
Is
themselves.
that kind of sense of shame? If family feels ashamed.
As part of it, and so as part of the guilt, you cover, and you cover them from people looking at you and wondering what went wrong with you as the parent, and you also try to cover maybe what you feel as a parent, whatever that is, that feeling of maybe um lack of worth, lack of something, whatever it is that parents feel, why they were the ones who had to give birth to such a child, because I was the first for my mother, so you can imagine. And that taking care of mentality, we want to inject the importance of parents first speaking life over your children, regardless of what they look like, regardless of their disability, regardless of the severity of the disability. And also to help them to learn to do things. Let them learn to hold the spoon. Let them learn to hold the cup. Let them learn, no matter if they have one hand or no hands at all. People with disabilities learn with what they have. So if they have no hands, they use their feet. If they don't have feet, they use their hands. If they have nothing, they use their mouth or their eyes or their nose or their whatever it is. You would have maybe seen videos of an Nick
Yes.
from Australia.
Yes.
He has no hands and his feet are so tiny.
Mm.
But look at what he has achieved. He has a mouth and he uses his mouth. And so I say to parents, deposit in your children that confidence that they need to become, and let them know, even if they can only lift something with their mouth and move it from one place to the other, let them do that and do it with such pride and dignity so that they know they are contributing to something that's important. I went to Japan on numerous occasions, and I have had the privilege of going overseas and seeing how persons with disabilities live and are treated. And in 2009, and that's another story by itself, I will have to share with you one day. The Lord allowed me that opportunity in 2009 to see disabilities from a totally different angle. I saw where persons with severe disabilities, that in Jamaica we would be taking care of them, they are working, they're married, they have children, they live in society and are part of society, they go to school. And so 2009 bolstered my advocacy and made me the person that I am. So even though I started working at the council in 1999, it wasn't until 2009 that my eyes were popped open and I had a full understanding of disability. and what it means, and the fact that the convention on the convention on the rights of persons with disabilities that Jamaica ratified in 2007, that definition in that convention says that your disability is not because of your impairment, but it is the barriers in society that causes the disability. Now, that's a radical
It is.
definition
It
that
is
we have
radical.
not yet, not even us in Jamaica have yet, although we have ratified, we haven't yet adopted that, into our act. But we review in 3 years, so we'll see what happens. But
Dr.
having
Hendricks, you have said a big thing, and we're going to pull the conversation together. But the movement from just caring for to empowering, enabling, just allowing persons to be, and the taboo word that you mentioned earlier is handicap, that persons with disability are not, or disabilities are not handicapped. And I think that's just a big and major takeaway. I'm going to give you an opportunity to say some wrap-up thoughts and to speak directly to Jamaicans who still have a kind of negative attitude towards those with disabilities. In a few words, what would you say to such people?
look at me,
Mm.
look at me, and what the Lord has done. If it hadn't been for the empowerment of my grand aunt way back when, if it hadn't been the opportunities to see and to know that persons with disabilities can, then maybe I too would be one of those that even as a church you would be helping out, or society would be giving a handout. And so I say, empower our people with disabilities, allow them to go to school. And that's one of the rights that the Disabilities Act promotes: the right to education and training, the right to employment. And persons with disabilities have those rights just like any other human being. As the church, persons with disabilities should be made to feel that they are contributing to the growth and development in the church, that they too should be growing and developing in the church, and they shouldn't just be seen as a charity case, the church and everybody else giving them a handout. What can they do to ensure that they become that independent individual? And let me tell you, I'm not fooling myself to believe that everybody has this mentality that I have had it because of the years of exposure,
Yes, right.
because persons with disabilities themselves also has to be infused with this mindset, because we as a people have allowed them to feel disempowered, and so they believe that they have no power, but they do. And so we have to help them even to see this in themselves, their own capabilities and their own abilities. We have to help them to see that and help them to develop those. And as we lead them into education and exposure and allowing them to have a voice, allowing them to have a seat at the table, so they are part of the decision making, so they learn to make decisions for themselves, and as part of the decision making of anything, the church, the society, the organization, allowing them to train and develop like everybody else in other organizations. Give them those opportunities for growth and development, then they too can become the individuals that can be valuable members of society. And for
Hallelujah.
those and for those that have aspired and have trained and have reached up to tertiary level, and they have their certification and qualification, yet we refuse to give them a job, we refuse to give them a place at the table, they have that right as well. Allow them the interview like everybody else. Let it not be the disability that is the focus, but their qualification. And if it is that you want to know how they will function in the environment, then ask them, because they have very creative means of being accommodated in an environment that is not as expensive as you think. So our churches, we need to have the necessary accommodations, the ramps. But that's not the only thing. The attitude is the first move. The attitude is the first move, the first barrier we need to move. And once we move the attitude of that barrier, then the steps can be knocked down, the doorways can be widened, the sign language interpretation can be there, because we now begin to think, what can I do? What can I do as a church? What can I do as an organization to enable anybody with any disability to be part of this body and contribute to it in a meaningful way?
Woman of God, Jamaican, strong woman, educated, but also having a heart of compassion and a deep understanding of those who have disabilities. Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks, for sharing these moments with us. You know, I am the better for it. And certainly, big thing you said at the end, that attitudes need to change first. And those attitudes will lead to enabling actions. And I will certainly do my part in helping in that process. Thank you, Christine, and continue to be the bubbly person that you are, with a testimony that cannot be contained. May God continue to bless you as you continue to serve your church and your country for the glory of God. And may the lives of those with disabilities in this country be better because of your service. Thank you again,
Thank
and
you so
bless you.
much.
My
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us this month at Conversations at the Well. I trust that you have been touched, inspired, but also challenged by the thoughts shared by this wonderful Jamaican, Dr. Christine Hendricks. God bless you everyone. Tune in again next month for another in our series Conversations at the Well.